Alec, you've been part of these campaigns in Epping about the Bell Hotel and these ongoing legal disputes about whether or not migrants can be kept in that hotel. And that really sparked a whole load of them. We've seen thousands of people marching yet again, 6 Sunday in a row yesterday in Crowborough in East Sussex against they now reckon it's going to be about 600 migrants, single, young men of fighting age, arriving from often war-torn or basket case or both countries. And being put in a camp just 20 minutes from ordinary people wandering around their local town in East Sussex. And this is kind of part of the problem that we've been talking about in terms of the risks to our country. What do you make of these growing protests and growing public sort of being willing to speak out and to take action about this issue of illegal migrants entering our country and being put in among us?
Yeah, hi. I mean, so I went to the first protest in Crowborough, which was 6 weeks ago, and I was overwhelmed by the number of people that were there. And these people are everything from children to 90-year-old women, people in work. Every strand of the community was out. This is a little town in Sussex, 22,000 people, and they've gone about their business. Nothing's really affected them, not like some other areas, the big cities where we've seen HMOs and hotels, etc. And now suddenly they're told that they're going to have 600 men dumped in the middle of their town. Now, no curfews, no containment, left to wander around and do what they want. So ultimately, they're terrified. They've never experienced anything like this. But these are protests that have been going up and down the country for months and months and months. But still, Julia, 737 men came in on Saturday into this country, and they're the ones we know about, because I know that they're coming in on trucks. They're coming in to other and
that is the key thing, and that's something, again, you think, the boats kind of started around 2018, and they'd been coming through Eurotunnel on the backs of lorries and on the ferries, and there was a feeling that they just moved to the boats. No, they're carrying on doing that. We're just not being, that's not being publicised, because it's not the same as literally watching these people all getting off with their life jackets on the beaches.
And I mean, look, so those 737 men, so that is a Crowborough camp. More than a Crowborough camp. That's a Crowborough camp and a Bell Hotel in one day, at a cost to the taxpayer of 28 million, because even the Home Office will declare that it costs £41,000 to keep an asylum seeker or an illegal migrant, depending on what the term you want to use, for a year. So the cost is spiralling it out of control. And we are seeing these men coming in week after week after week. There is nowhere to put them, Julia. So the fact is, they have to put them in camps in Crowborough and other locations, because they've got nowhere to put them.
Well, indeed, we don't want them in the hotels. We're paying a fortune for them. We don't want them in, the solution is that we'll put them in local accommodation, in houses of multiple occupancy. Well, even closer to our children and young women. No, thank you. Camps, fair enough. OK, they're in a camp, but only if it's sealed and fenced and it's got armed guards, I'm afraid.
That's it. They're allowed to do what they want.
Yeah, there is a financial cost, no doubt at all, but there is a cost, and again, this is where those protests at Epping started, to our young women and girls in particular. We know, rising crime generally, but particularly violence against women and girls. We've had numerous cases, and not just a sexual assault of a 14-year-old girl at Epping, another rape case that was brought that still hasn't come to trial, I believe. We've had numerous other cases. That thing that never happens, that just, funnily enough, all keeps on happening. But this comes at a time when we had the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, and I'm sure we'd have been talking about this a lot more this morning if we hadn't had the horrific events in Australia of this new policies on tackling violence against women and girls. But you can't be serious about tackling violence against women and girls if you all tried to stop there being any proper expose of what was going on with the grooming gangs, most extreme violence against women and girls, and also B, if you are importing thousands of foreign men, not all of whom are going to be rapists or sexual assaulters, but too many are, and one is too many.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, this is like the horse has already bolted, and now suddenly the government is seeing this outrage. And so they're trying to patch it over with a plaster. At the end, they're talking about safety for women and children as if they're building a cage around loads of chickens, but they're leaving a gate open for a fox. Yeah. It's absolute insanity. And I mean, you know, as we said, these men are coming over day after day. A friend of mine was in Calais this weekend and said he saw thousands and thousands of men. And how many women did he see? Two women. No children, 2 women. And this is being completely ignored by people like the Greens, all these, you know, giving us these, you know, these Calais charities. We have got no room, we can't afford them, and they are posing a risk to the most vulnerable people in society. End of story. The government have got to get a grip. They can't deal with what they've got, so why are the borders still open? It's absolute insanity. They're completely out of control.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on all of that. All of in Pink Lady campaign. A quick word from Sam Armstrong.
Yeah, but the political reality is beginning to bite for this government, and they are not going to get away with it forever.
By the way, this is all happening for years under your lot. We need to stress that.
Well, absolutely right, and they were rightly booted out from office.
Because of it.
So will this lot be too.
And so will this lot be, indeed. Let's have a reality check. We need to act, and we need to act now.
There are common denominators in any pattern of events. And let me tell you what is not a common denominator in recent terrorist attacks. It's not the weapons they use. Mm-hmm. Islamist terrorist attackers have used knives, they've used bombs, they've used vehicles, and now they've used guns as well. These are people that will use whatever they can get their hands on, as you say. So the idea that you can deal with this problem by going after weapons of any variety is for the birds. There is one common denominator, and one common denominator alone. These are largely men who believe in a bizarre, dangerous, backwards idea by which they believe that their religious ideals can be imposed, including by force, on millions of people, some of whom think that Muhammad's claims to be a prophet of God or anything but a revelation, and they believe that they can impose that lifestyle on us all, and they believe it is their duty to do so. Until we deal with that, we will never get anywhere. There is another problem, and I'm going to speak carefully, but I mean this. I think, in a sense, this is a microcosm of the troubles with mass migration. Yep. Ahmed al-Ahmed was a relatively recent refugee from Syria, and he was a hero. He charged towards a gunman and disarmed him. He is precisely the kind of person I would love to live next door to. He is the best of all of us.
And he went in knowing that he would die.
That's right.
He said that to his friend.
However, when you import millions of people from difficult countries, to put it mildly, you are going to get a range of people. And amongst the people that came in masse into Australia was Sajid Akram. And Australia not only obviously failed to perform basic checks on him, but they gave him a licence to own 6 firearms, 6 firearms, and like many people, he had a family here in Australia, and like in many cases, second-generation migrants, despite being citizens of their country, end up being more radical than their parents. That is a well-known, observable phenomenon. And my position is very clear. We have had quite a lot of migration in this country, and I don't want to go back and reinvent the wheel that much or relitigate that. But in future, we know now with a very good data set, when you import people en masse from the third world, yes, you get some good people, but you get some people that think a good Sunday afternoon activity is to go down to a beach and shoot at Jews. Yep. And when our politicians are making decisions about our future immigration policy, about who they let in and who they don't, and how careful the checks are on those who are let in, you would dare think that maybe, rather than talking some nonsense about, capping the number of guns you need to own in Australia for everyone, that they would think about, maybe it's not a good idea to import all of these people when some of them we know wish to kill people on our streets. Yeah.
You're playing the odds. You're playing the odds. And in the same way, I liken this to being a nightclub bouncer. you know, a bunch of 10 lads turn up, are you going to let the 10 lads in on their own? No. If you got women with you, then we'll let you in, because we know a bunch of 10 lads are likely to be a problem later on. You probably not. You might not be, but the odds are too high, so we don't let in groups of 10 lads. It's that simple. I don't. You know, you're not wearing your football shirt in the pub on match day, because in some pubs, because they don't want trouble. Not everybody's going to cause the trouble, but they play the odds. I don't understand why we don't play the odds better when it comes to our immigration policy. I would say, genuinely, that I think there are certain countries now we should say, thank you. I'm with Trump on this one. Thank you. No more. We're done now. We're done. You're only entering in exceptional circumstances. I'm also of the view that anyone who's on a watch list, this son, Naveed Akram, he wasn't the licensed gun owner. He was born in Australia, but he was investigated some 6 years ago over ties to ISIS. Here's the thing. I mean, OK, he's an Australian citizen. They can't get rid of him. Fair enough. I get that. However, we have so many people on our watch list here in the UK. Some 3,000 are being watched constantly. We've got 40,000 at least who they are worried about. Virtually every single time we have a terror attack in this country, as you say, it is nearly always either someone who's come from abroad or the child of someone who's come from abroad, first generation. In fact, they're more likely to be, as you say, first generation. That is a very clear, absolutely statistical phenomenon. And a lot of them are dual nationals. I'm of the view, they nearly always have been flagged up and then decided they're not a risk. Seems to me that if people have been flagged up and they're considered a bit of a risk, and they are dual nationals or not British nationals, I say, bye-bye. Thank you for coming. We no longer wish you to be here. I think the benefit of the doubt has to go to the safety of the British people, or in the case of Australia, the safety of the Australian people, rather than someone's right to live wherever the hell they want to in the world. I think the British people have had enough. We are going to have a terror attack of this magnitude at some point. It's not a case of if, it is a case of when. And when that happens, we're going to have the same politicians with the same platitudes who've also been spouting their nonsense about genocide in Gaza, recognising a Palestinian state, or like the Home Secretary attending a pro-Palestinian march, marching under the Palestinian flag, for goodness sake, in the wake of October the 7th, for goodness sake. And they're all going to be surprised. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, I am shocked by what happened in Australia, as I tweeted her. Why are you shocked? I'm not shocked. I'm never shocked by terror attacks. I also don't give thoughts or prayers. I don't like candles. I don't want any of that. I haven't looked back in anger since the Manchester Arena. I'm done. Full stop, done. I'm with Morrissey on this one. I absolutely look back in anger, and I look forward in anger at my politicians for not doing what they should be doing, which is protecting us from these people. There are too many people in our midst who wish us ill. And people thinking again, oh, it's the Jews, not just the Jews, but it's the Jews, it's not my problem, I'm not Jewish. Don't worry, when they finish with the Jews, they'll come for everybody else. That is part of the political ideology of Islamist extremism. It is. They say the quiet bit out loud. Globalise the Intifada. They say the quiet bit out loud. They have people marching on our streets saying it. But this stuff is imbued in our political class, our civil service, teachers at schools, the universities, the NHS, all our political parties. This stuff is, I mean, good God, it's in our media. BBC, Sky, ITV are literally, in Channel 4, saturated in this thought process. We are totally surrounded by this, and we need to root it out.
Yeah, and I'll tell you who we can start rooting it out with, and I tell you because it's emblematic of how far the rot is. The Sydney Morning Herald newspaper in Australia have tracked down the wife of Sajid Akram and the mother of Naveed Akram, a man who's shot at a 10-year-old girl. Shot at a 10-year-old girl. This is what his mother has to say about him. She says, he doesn't go out, he doesn't mix around with friends, he doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke, he doesn't go to bad places, he goes to work, he comes home, he goes to exercise, and that's it. She says, anyone would wish to have a son like my son. He's a good boy.
He's a good boy. I mean, he's not, sweetheart. We've just seen that.
Your son is a monster. You bred him, you raised him, and he, alongside your husband, has just committed one of the most appalling atrocities in your country's history. You should be hanging your head in shame. And the fact that after your son has done that you have not immediately renounced him, and immediately said what he has done is appalling, means that you, Verena Akram, are, in my view, unfit to live in a Western country.
You're part of the problem, certainly. I mean, do you know what I thought was really fascinating? You mentioned Ahmed El Ahmed, who was, you know, a store owner, father of two, who had already been shot in the arm and in the hand. He had a bandage on when he tackled one of the gunmen. It looks like he tackled the father, Sajid Akram, and he managed, I mean, amazing, attacked him from behind, unarmed, grabbed the gun. By all accounts, by the way, Australian police were on the scene at this point, which is a bit of a worry. Why were they not doing this and leaving it to a civilian? Because they were unarmed. Again, you know, we're having some issues here. We're going to have to start, you know, and this is an issue in England as well, I think a lot of people say.
Yeah, but Julia, just on that point, okay, we are now talking very seriously about the fact that we're having to end unarmed policing in this country that we've had forever because of mass migration and the consequence of problems of Islamist terrorism.
And that is the thing. Well, let me just play some of the footage. I mean, if you haven't seen it, I don't know where you've been for the last 24 hours, but Ahmed Ahmed tackling this there's this gunman and disabling him is absolutely extraordinary. I mean, just so brave. And he did shout to his friend, I might die, but I've got to do this. And he went in and he managed to get the gun off the man, and then within a few minutes, both men had been shot by the police. But it's fascinating. It's a Syrian refugee, a Muslim man. It's fascinating. I mean, I was tweeted, this guy's an absolute hero. The number of people who replied to me, the usual suspects, going, "Oh, but you're gutted he's Muslim. Oh, look, he's Muslim." Like, okay, I couldn't care less whether he was atheist, Muslim, Catholic, Sikh, Jehovah's Witness. I don't care. It's totally irrelevant. He was a good man. People like me who are talking about the problem of Islamist ideology and terrorism don't have a problem with Muslims. Most people in this country don't have a problem with Muslims because people are not Islamophobic. People are not racist in this country. People have a problem with an ideology which some Muslims, too large a minority in this country, particularly younger men, follow, and that's our issue. So I'd be absolutely delighted whether this man had any religion at all or none. The point is that good people do good things and bad people do bad things. But let's try and identify who the bad people are a little bit sooner. Would that be a good idea? I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Oh, just one final thing we ought to mention. What the hell is going on at Downing Street? Keir Starmer yesterday, they had obviously one of those sort of scheduled tweets to go out, posts to go out for Hanukkah, the first day of this festival of light for the Jewish religion. And this message went out about 2 hours after the Bondi Beach attack had started. And it goes out, wishing everyone a happy Hanukkah. Just totally like, someone allowed that scheduled message to go out, and then another one from 10 Downing Street's official account. And then sort of an hour later, the Prime Minister going, "Oh, this is terrible, what's happened?" I mean, we have a whole load of people. We have a government that apparently doesn't work on a Sunday morning. There's a major terror attack in one of our closest allies. And no one has bothered to look at the news before they've allowed these messages to go out. I mean, this is not about the niceties of what someone said on social media. This is about the abject lack of basic competence and basic sort of knowledge that is going on in Number 10.
If you think that's bad, you wait till you see what they've got coming later this week. A new definition of Islamophobia, which is going to ban precisely the conversation that you and I have just had.
Well, we'll both be in prison then.
We will both be in prison.
Because I'm going to still have that conversation.
And, you would think that the government may wish to take seriously the words of its own independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, who says that he is against such a definition. Why? Because it would threaten free speech and the work of the authorities in tackling Islamic terrorism. And our government, in the week after this, proposes to roll it out, notwithstanding.
Of course they do. I wonder what their concern is about that, but there we are. I'm sorry you were speaking to you on such a horrific day, the morning after, the day before that horrific Hanukkah terror attack on Bondi Beach. Can I put to you the question that I'm putting to our audience today? What do Western governments need to do to prevent more terror attacks just like that massacre from happening? Because let's face it, an awful lot of us are saying, when does it happen here? We're only 2 months on from the Eden Park synagogue attack. Thankfully, I mean, we have to be grateful that only 2 people died in that attack. It could have been dozens. How do we prevent it from happening here?
You know, that's the question everyone should be asking today, isn't it? And I think there are quite a few things we need to do. We need to get a handle on our borders because we are importing anti-Semites. There is no question about that whatsoever. We are bringing people in from countries that are very, very anti-Jewish. We need to get serious about anti-Semitism in our own society. We've seen a surge in it in Britain and in Australia over the past 2 years since Hamas's pogrom, the 7th of October. And we need to challenge Israelophobia. We can't just let this Israelophobic fashion run riot amongst the activist class and the media and the liberal establishment who think that hating Israel is not the same thing as hating Jews. But I'm sorry, none of us are buying that anymore. If you spend your every waking hour demonizing the world's only Jewish nation as the worst nation in the world, then you are going to stick a target sign on the Jewish people themselves. Everyone now sees that. If we're expected to think it's a coincidence that there has been a surge in attacks on Jews at exactly the same time there's been this surge in hatred for Israel, we're not buying it. So we've got to control immigration better, know who's coming into this country, clamp down on anti-Semitism and clamp down on Israelophobia, and we need to do it with urgency.
And this is the thing, we needed to do it, probably, as one of our guests say, so 20 years ago, 10 years ago, a couple of years ago. But this is not something like new. The anti-Semitism that we saw under Jeremy Corbyn on the hard left, that had been growing. I think it perhaps always been there for quite some time. We've had anti-Semitism on the far right as well. But the anti-Semitism which takes the form of being, they call it pro-Palestinianism, they call it concern for innocent children in Gaza. But by the way, more children will have died in Sudan in 1 week than died the entire 2.5-year war, almost, in Gaza. So, but no marches for those children. No one's interested. No Jews. No news. We know that. But this pretend sort of masked anti-Semitism in terms of anti-Zionism, this is mainstream now. This is things that the Prime Minister says and does in recognising a Palestinian state. This is something that the now Home Secretary stood there with a Palestinian flag. This is the norm at the BBC, Sky News, ITV, Channel 4 and elsewhere. This is mainstream now. How do you tackle it when it's no longer something that's just happening in a couple of dodgy mosques with some dodgy imported imams or far right or far left, but it's just mainstream society?
You know, that's such an important question because that mainstreaming of so-called anti-Zionism is emboldening the worst anti-Semites, the kind of Islamist anti-Semites, the ones who are willing to carry out extreme forms of violence. There's no question in my mind that there is a relationship between these two things. There's a relationship between that supposedly respectable anti-Zionism and this murderous anti-Semitism. Yeah. In my mind, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. There is no difference between them now whatsoever.
Well, hold on a minute. I know plenty of Jewish people who aren't Zionists, and they're very critical of not just of Netanyahu's government in Israel, but most of Israel's actions. What would you say? They can't be anti-Semitic if they're Jewish. That's what people would say.
You know, people say it's not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel. Obviously, that's the case. It's not racist to criticize a country. We should all be free to criticize countries. But we're not talking about criticism of Israel anymore, and we haven't been for quite a few years. We're talking about blind, bigoted hatred for Israel. Yeah. We're talking about people on our streets every weekend calling openly for the destruction of Israel from the river to the sea. We're talking about people depicting Israel as the most bloodthirsty nation on earth, a uniquely evil nation, a nation that loves to kill children. That's what they used to say about the Jews in the 1200s and the 1300s, by the way. We're talking about a venomous loathing for one state above all other states. Yeah. That is, they call it anti-Zionism. To my mind, it's anti-Semitism.
Because it's coincidentally the only Jewish state in the world, the only Jewish state in the Middle East. You talked about we need to challenge Israelophobia. We need to challenge, tackle our borders. Okay, talking of the borders, what does that actually mean? Because the reality is we have imported a lot of people to this country, and as Sam Armstrong was saying, we've imported a lot of people to this country from, third world countries, basket case countries, where they're war-torn, they don't share our values, and they are coming here imbued, either they are first generation or their children. We see this increasingly second generation who feel like for some way they don't fit in. They are turning to this extremist Islamist ideology, which an awful lot of the Middle East is trying to clamp down on. We apparently are saying, oh, multiculturalism, isn't it grand? Diversity is our strength. What are we going to do about that? We've got people who are here, already in this country, either first generation or born and bred Brits here, who hate not just Jews, they hate this country, Western values, democracy, Christians, infidels like me who are atheists. They hate us. They biding their time and want to kill us. And it's not 2 or 3 people. We know huge number of people, on the vast majority of people on the terror watch list are Islamist extremists. Some 3,000 people being watched, some 40,000 who are a concern. And the estimates, when you look at polling done by lefty organisations like Channel 4 over the years, suggesting in terms of even among so-called moderate Muslim views, that some of those views are not what most people would consider moderate views. What are you going to do about it?
There is such a catastrophic failure of integration, and admitting that is the very first step. I know that's the easy bit, but there's a lot of people who still won't even admit that.
Yeah.
There was a moment about 10 years ago during the ISIS wars in Syria and Iraq when there were more British Muslims in ISIS than there were in the British Army.
Yes.
And that should have been a wake-up call to this country. That should have been the moment at which we said, hold on, why are 600 or 700 young men and women leaving this country and joining a death cult that beheads homosexuals and murders women and throws Christians into pits of fire? What's going on here? But of course, we weren't allowed to have that discussion, because if anyone raised it, they were called Islamophobic. They were accused of being racist. They were accused of starting a culture war. The starting point has got to be an honest, frank discussion, which is that we currently have the worst of both worlds. We are bringing in unprecedented numbers of people from, let's be honest, regressive parts of the world at exactly the same time that we have abandoned the project of integration, because the people who run this country don't think it's a country worth integrating into. They think Britain is a horrible place with a racist history and lots of Islamophobes wandering around and gammon, etc. So it's this toxic combination of pretty much opening the borders to people from crazy parts of the world, while also actively discouraging them from integrating.
And denigrating the home culture, denigrating Western values. The number of young people who think democracy is a bad thing, who think that everything that Britain and the West has ever done is terrible. Well, yeah, isn't it weird how they don't want to emigrate to those countries, but people do want to emigrate to these? Okay, so you talk about we need to recognise the problem, we need to talk about the problem. Yeah, okay. And then what do we do about it? Because I'm not entirely sure that's going to stop the next car bomb or the next truck attack or the next knifing or the next shooting.
There are some things that I think are quite straightforward, although if you watch this government, you'd think they aren't, but they actually are, which is firstly, stop the small boats, get a handle on our borders. We used to be the naval masters of the sea, and now we can't even stop a few small dinghies coming over from France. All the small boats should be stopped. Those young men should be turned away instantly or held and then deported. Anyone who came here illegally, in my view, should be sent back. You can't just come into a country illegally. That's not allowed.
And you mean including people who've been here 20 years?
I think it depends on what they've been doing in those 20 years. But I think there are lots of people who came here illegally who should be sent back. The far harder thing, Julia, of course, is exactly the problem you talk about, which is that the failure of integration often expresses itself further down the generational line. So if you look at Irish immigrants, for example, my parents are those, they didn't integrate spectacularly well in the 1970s. There was a war going on, the Troubles, bombs going off, and people were a bit wary of Catholics, and the Irish kind of kept to themselves. They weren't very well integrated, but their children are. And their grandchildren are. There's a generational warming to the host country, if we might put it like that. That's not happened with sections of the Muslim community or the Pakistani Muslim community. And in fact, often their grandchildren, the third generation here, are more radical than their grandparents were when they came here, often to flee Islamic rule, often because they wanted to be part of a country like Britain. Now we have youngsters born in Britain who have these London accents, who are technically speaking more British than me, who go around with their faces covered saying they hate Jews and they want to destroy Britain. This is a catastrophic failure. The problem, of course, we can't just throw those people out of the country. So we've got to tackle this at a root level in terms of changing the education system, changing the political system, and making it clear to people if you're in Britain, you live by British rules. There is no other choice.
So what should we be doing to deal with the threat from Russia? Because interestingly, later on today, we've seen some advanced words. The Air Chief Marshal, Sir Richard Knighton, he's Chief of the Defence Staff, the most senior military officer in this country. He's going to use a speech this evening to urge the British public to make defence and resilience a higher priority. He says that the whole of the UK, not just its armed forces, need to step up to deter the threat posed by Russia of a wider war in Europe. This follows calls from the senior naval chief a week or two ago, and also the MI6 chief, Blaise Metrowelli, basically saying that the front line is everywhere and that Britain is already on the front line against Russia and should be ready for Putin's export of chaos. So how worried should we be? Well, let's talk to Hamish de Bretton Gordon, OBE, a former British Army colonel. Good morning to you, Hamish.
Hi, good morning,
Thank
Julia.
you for joining us. I mean, it seems to me military leader after military leader, they're not waiting until they retire to speak out. They are saying it while they're in the job. We are in basically, we are effectively waiting for a hot war to break out, and we need to prepare to prevent that from happening. Do you agree with them?
Well, I do, absolutely. And I'm delighted that people like CDS are now talking exactly as you say before it's too late and they can have an impact. And as you said, the head of MI6 have warned that Russia poses an acute threat to us. She talks about the cyber attacks and the drone attacks. The JLR, Jaguar Land Rover cyber attack, costs the government $1.5 billion to bail out, which is money that can now not be spent on defence. So
well, Jaguar should have perhaps had their own insurance, their own proper cyber protection, which they didn't have, I understand.
Well, I'm no great expert on cyber, but whatever they did or didn't have, it's cost us all a hell of a lot of money. But I think the point is that, undoubtedly it had Russian DNA all over it.
Yeah.
We've seen the Russian spy ships checking out our undersea cables and pipelines, no doubt, again, to have an impact on us. And we've seen drones flying around. So I think it's a realization, and everything that's happening in Russia and Ukraine at the moment. And I personally don't believe that Putin has any interest in peace. He's not going to blink, but he's pretty certain that we will blink.
Yeah. And he's probably right.
He is. But the key thing that we can do is to show what we have, what CDS is calling national resilience.
When you say CDS, you mean Chief of the Defence Staff?
Yes,
Most of us don't know
that. National resilience, which we just can't rely on the military for, because we've been holed out so much.
Well, what do we mean by this? Because we're spending way less than 3% of our GDP on national defence, and we're going to make it up 3.5% in about 5 years' time. Well, we're not. It's going to be playing around with numbers, and it needs to be way more than that, and it needs to be tomorrow or even yesterday rather than in a few years' time. Everyone who's got any clue what's going on is saying that, but our politicians aren't doing that. What on earth can the British public be doing to further our resilience other than pressurising our government to spend a heck of a lot more money and put more resources and focus on our national defences? What else are we supposed to be doing?
Well, I think there's a lot we can do, and they do talk about what's called a strategic reserve. There are about 1 million veterans like myself still in the country who could certainly be used and are very keen to get involved as well. And I think, any citizen of this country who doesn't want to get involved and doesn't want to help out to provide national resilience should probably consider whether they should be here at all. But I think there are a lot of things.
Well, but there'll be lots of Brits whose families have been in this country for many, many centuries who will say, I've heard this from callers, I don't want to fight for this country. I don't believe in this country.
Well, then presumably they're quite happy that this country is run by somebody else. And I think the vast majority of us don't. And the realisation from MI6 and from the military is that we are under severe threat from the Russians. And nobody thinks they're going to stop if they prevail in Ukraine. But the way to stop them is to show that we have a strong conventional deterrent so that Putin does blink and doesn't just think that we're weak and capitulate, which, unfortunately, as you suggest, some people in this country might prefer that.
But how much can we control this? Look, we don't have conscription. We've seen some civil conscription in France. We know in Finland, or actually lots of other countries around Europe are now moving to this way. Do we need to actually, actually have a national service of some kind? We need to get our young people trained up, ready, so if and when they are called to arms, because a lot of people just say we're both warmongers.
Well, yeah, I quite agree. I think we need to have plans for it. We don't need it now. The Strategic Reserve, the veterans, they're all keen to get involved. Absolutely. We have to look at our European, people like the Finns and the Swedes, where everybody is trained and they can put a lot of people on the ground, but they're a lot closer to the threat than we are. I think we just need plans, because if it all does go badly, and the worst case scenario that we do get involved in a conflict in Europe, then I'm afraid we'll all be involved. So we need plans rather than just trying to ignore it, that we have done since the end of the Cold War. And we have been ignoring it. Our politicians have been ignoring it. But one of the reasons they've done that is because it's quite convenient not to have to spend a huge chunk of our national income on defence and spending it on, nurses or free this, free that, a bit more welfare, everybody. That's what people prefer, isn't it? Well, one can see, and certainly I'm sure the present government would say that's what they were voted in on. But unfortunately, the situation is rapidly changing. And if we spend all the money, all the government money on welfare and other things, then we will not have a defence to be able to carry on in the way that people would like to live in this country. I'm wondering if we could solve a lot of this with, hey, no more welfare for anyone under the age of 30. You're joining the military. That might focus minds in lots of different ways, eh? So Donald Trump suing the BBC. It's funny because it's a $10 billion lawsuit. But the actual document that has been put in says it's $5 billion. But we know they're claiming $5 billion for defamation, and also $5 billion for a violation of Florida's Deceptive and Unfair Trade Practices Act, filed in Florida because the statute of limitations on such a claim would no longer be valid in the UK. He's just under the wire for the 2-year delay, 2-year time limit on that in Florida. Do you think first of all, do you think it's fair for him to sue?
Well, I think it's clear that the BBC did something horrendously wrong. I prefer these things not to be sorted out in court, particularly when you're dealing with someone who is the leader of the free world. I mean, he certainly has his right reply. He has the bully pulpit of the entire world, and particularly as someone who, frankly, is forced to pay that licence fee. I'd rather that there weren't any BBC funds that were being redirected to someone who doesn't really necessarily need it. I think it's to make a point, isn't it? Yeah. It's to try and exact a cost for dealing with him in this way. He's done that in the US with various other broadcasters already, lawsuits and so on, to try and stop them from having such biased coverage. They have paid up and settled because, of course, they need to operate in America. Which may well be part of the issue here, because, of course, the BBC is the British Broadcasting Corporation, but they obviously do operate in the US. It's BBC America. Exactly. So maybe this is what the longer game is. But broadly speaking, I think everyone knows that the BBC has been incredibly biased. Everyone can see they were banged to rights over that panorama document. Don't think the BBC thinks that. Not at all, but I don't even think this lawsuit would change their minds. No, exactly. Well, then they can play victim, can't they? I mean, this is the thing, even like the glib coverage on Radio 4 this morning, which I had to listen to just to know what they were saying about it. I managed not to punch my radio, to the floor. But, I mean, there's no doubt at all, you don't accidentally put two bits of a speech together to make it look like quite blatant. I mean, it would be impossible to spot unless you knew the speech off by heart. I think if you've given that speech, we go, hold on a minute. Yeah. The claim that basically Donald Trump was basically telling people, the head of the January 6th riots, basically, go down to the Capitol and basically cause mayhem. That's not what he said. Now, again, a lot of the coverage of that speech has been very unreasonable. There's no doubt at all in my mind that when it did happen, we know this is from testimony from his own staff, his own family members in those January the 6th committee hearings, that he did nothing to stop it once it had started. He was the president. He could have gone out on social media and said, stop now, go home, do not do this in my name. He allowed it to happen. People were pleading with him to stop it. That's on record, OK? So we know that. He wasn't unhappy about it happening. He thought it was probably justified, is my view. Did he call for it to happen? No, I don't think he did. And this is the thing, why any criticism of Donald Trump is not Trump derangement syndrome. You can criticise him for things that he does wrong, but you don't need to criticise him for things he doesn't do wrong. And you certainly don't need to make things up. And if he is such a heinous, awful human being as the BBC think he is,
then you wouldn't need to make stuff up, would you? Because the clips would be there, the evidence would be there. And we'll come on to that with this Rob Reiner post. My thing is, they did make something up about him, and they did mischaracterise him. Now, the question is, with defamation or libel, is has it actually damaged someone's character? Have they had a material loss? He says it did do that. You could argue that it probably didn't. People had made up their minds. It wasn't broadcast in America. Someone with the VPN could have watched it in Florida, and that might have changed the vote. But he won. He won that election in 2024. This was broadcast just a week beforehand. So, was there any damage done? No. But I'm rather of the view that even if someone doesn't do any damage to somebody, I think that people have a right to sodding well expect compensation when someone tells lies about them.
No, that's completely fair. I mean, of course, we need to be pretty careful about how we deal with defamation, how tightly those laws are drawn, very much tighter in the US than they are in the UK. I'm sure Donald Trump is furious that he's missed the kind of statute of limitations which exists on defamation cases.
I thought it was interesting that this all came out just a week or two after. I thought that the timing of that was quite...
Exactly. And who knows if those things might well be connected.
Well,
but I think the issue, as you say, is the fact that he is already someone who inspires very divided opinions. Is this BBC coverage, which, as you say, wasn't broadcast in the US itself, really made a material difference? Almost certainly not. Are they bang to rights on this issue? Absolutely. And I think it would just be probably slightly more edifying and would not really hand the BBC the kind of victim card that they now have to play if this case didn't
the wonderful BBC. But of course, this all comes about at the time when the government is now looking at the review of the licence fee that was coming up. They'll want to get that all done and dusted before they leave power, no question at all. Of course, they're doing a two-term in office, aren't they? Of course, that's their plan.
Definitely going to happen.
Definitely 100% going to happen, Keir. Not a problem at all. But this is the thing. I mean, you can like the BBC if you want to like the BBC and still think that what they did wrong and they should pay for it. Except that it's us paying for it. It's us. It's the public paying. It's our taxes paying for it. But if they fight it and they win, it's still us paying for it. But I've been hearing some legal experts, and we'll talk to them on Mark Stevens in a few moments' time, saying, look, these things tend to settle for around the $10 million mark. Ain't going to win 10 billion or 5 billion or 8 billion or 100 billion. It's going to be around the 10 million mark. But it would cost about 100 million to fight through the American courts. So, settle it, move on. But here's my thing. I want that 10 million to be paid by the senior executives that allowed that to go out and didn't do the checks and balances, and the production company that employed somebody, because it was an external production company, to doctor that. I mean, I think people, this is the problem with the public sector, these people are not liable. And even so far, we've had two people go, the Director General of the BBC and the Head of News of the BBC. Both, I'm glad they're gone. But, by the way, we're still paying their wages, we'll pay their pensions. I mean, they haven't actually gone yet, they're still in their jobs, waiting for new people to be appointed. Again, always available for both jobs, guys, should you need me, if you want some impartial news. I just, not enough heads have rolled over this. This was an appalling thing to do. And whenever the BBC, people are attacking them. No, we don't need to attack you. You do this to yourselves.
No, and it's part of the problem is the fact that a lack of accountability is built into the BBC from top to bottom. They're not directly accountable to viewers in the way that commercial broadcasters are, obviously, because they can rely on the licence fee. There's also a lot of politics which comes into it, which we've seen in the wake of this. You had basically the sort of Labour Party on the one hand saying, yes, they made mistakes, but also kind of running interference for them a little bit, because broadly speaking, they probably weren't that bothered by that kind of edit and the way that it was made. So should they be held accountable? Absolutely. The fact that heads have rolled already is a good thing, although it was telling how long it kind of took for that to take place. But is really a extortionate lawsuit, which is really only going to have a bill that will be footed by the British taxpayer. Ultimately, the way to solve this in our interest, obviously.
Well, indeed. And you've got to wonder whether or not Donald Trump could do damage to his reputation. I say this as someone who wouldn't have voted for him in 2016 or 2020, but I would have voted for him in 2024. He was the better of two options. And actually, in terms of policies, what he's been doing and what he is doing, I'm very supportive of a lot of it, not all of it, but a hell of a lot of it. I think he's been far more sensible and sane and moral, actually, on a lot of these issues than the alternatives from the Democrats. But I also don't think he's a good person. I think it is possible to hold these ideas in your head. No, I don't think. I think he's a genuinely narcissistic, possibly psychopathic person. I genuinely, as you know, look, whether you agree with me or not, and people shout at me, oh, you got Trump derangement. I haven't got derangement syndrome. I give him credit when he does good things, and I criticise him when he does bad things. This is what you do. We know there have been gasps in court when the court was shown the first time in full this footage from this dash cam. Showing that actually his version of events, his sort of, this claim we thought, and I think a lot of us thought originally it was a terrorist attack, it had all the hallmarks of an Islamist terror attack. Then it was this guy, we thought, was he drunk? No alcohol, no drugs. And then we thought, well, maybe he was scared and he was out of control in the car. Quite the opposite from the evidence we heard yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. My initial, the initial thing was, of course, a terrorism. Then we heard he was a former soldier, and we thought, is it PTSD or something like that? But of course, what he's been caught out with is modern technology, because the dash cam footage, that's amazing. He wouldn't have had that. The police wouldn't have had that 10 years ago. Then you also have all the CCTV and the ANPR, which have obviously tracked his vehicle, because what the judge made reference to was the awfulness of his driving before the event, to show some sort of the motive here, or the manner in which he was behaving. Also interesting to find out that as a young man, he's got convictions of violence, both in the army, a court-martial, and then when he was left the army. But I think Mr. Justice Menery, the judge, is carefully going through all the injuries of the 31 people who resulted in charges, including, as you said, a baby flung out of a pushchair. It is just unbelievable. And also the judge rightly made reference to the impact on the city. The fact that not only were people injured, but for days, things were cordoned off, businesses were impacted on. Just a dreadful
but
incident.
Also a day of celebration. And again, some of the testimony, the victims' impact statements, the mother who was injured herself, but seeing her baby's pram and her baby flung out and thinking for a moment that her baby was dead and that she would die, and she has other young children. I mean, those 30 seconds, the worst 30 seconds of her life. You're never going to unlive that experience. But this is the thing. I think a lot of us got the impression very early on, once we realised this was, this was a British man. He was a local man, father of two, and ex-Royal Marine. And again, was it PTSD? But this Mr. Ordinary, happily married guy, the neighbours liked him, everyone at work liked him, no issues, no drink, no drugs, and it must have been this moment of madness. But there's, as you say, there's evidence that he was driving erratically, he was angry. We can't say some of the words he was using, but genuinely, at the footage shows, as he was driving into children and driving over people, reversing and driving over them again. He was angry that people were in his way. And there's extraordinary testimony from one of the heroes of the day, actually, who the car stopped by him. He opened the door, grabbed in and basically, grabbed the stick and basically put it into park to try and slow the car down. An incredibly brave thing to do. He didn't know whether it was a terrorist attack or not, but just the whole thing is extraordinary. But do you think, has PTSD at all, been part of this at all? Is there any defence being offered for what he did on that day?
Not really, no. It's just being described as an extraordinary incident. But I think it's more than just that a moment in time. He's obviously very, very angry, and due to his driving, they've tracked him in the dash cam. So he's obviously very angry on that day. It wasn't just a momentary thing. And this has just brought out the absolute worst. The sort of Mr. We hear about, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Well, obviously, literally, you've got Dr. Jekyll who's living with his family, who's turned his life around, not had any convictions for some 30 years, runs a business, and then suddenly this
completely lost it. Yeah,
completely lost it. And then you'd think any rational person, having hit some people, you would think, whoa, time to stop. Yeah. But to keep on going. And the guy who put the park brake on said, you could hear him trying to rev the engine even as that went off.
He was pressing down the accelerator. It is just extraordinary. We haven't actually got to the point. I know this is all happening. Ian Collins is here right now, and we'll be hearing in his show, the actual sentence, because the judge is summing everything up right now. But he's certainly, a lot of the headlines today, he told the police after being arrested, I've ruined my family's life. But certainly, I can't see any mitigating circumstances at this point. Thank God no one died and there's not a murder charge there. This is just GBH, attempted GBH, 17 charges of that and many others. But realistically, victims as young as 6 months and as old as 77, he's going away for a very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you never know with sentencing. I'd expect at least 15 years or something, at least. But, you know, we just don't know. I mean, I can honestly say the judges, his summing up is very good. He's taken into account all the victims. As I say, he's taken into account the impact on the city. But we just don't know.
No,
but what the judge has said, of course, is he only pleaded guilty at the last moment, so that will have some impact.
But again, the last moment while we were waiting for the trial on the second day of the trial. Let me ask you, should we have an emergency census to try and find out just where everyone is and who everyone is who is in this country after the Boris wave, which we've seen, and this is such a staggering figure, 3.9 million, almost 4 million more people arriving in this country. Not sure we know where any of them are or who they are or what they're earning or if they're earning at all, but do we need a census to find out?
Well, we do need to find out somehow, Julia, because I've got no idea how many people are living in this country. I don't expect you do either.
Nope.
And that's one of the reasons why people are asking for this. You know, I'm not sure that we've got accurate figures, either of the numbers of people here. We are getting figures of the ins and outs, which you and I talk about regularly. I'm not sure they're even accurate. No. I would certainly introduce a biometric entry-exit system at our border. That's not going to be very expensive with technology these days, so we know exactly who's coming in and who's not coming. I mean, it wouldn't catch up the illegal clandestines, but it would certainly for legal migrants, we would know exactly the numbers and how long people are staying and so on and so forth. But in the communities, when I was regional director in the UK Border Agency, I did try and set up local immigration teams or regional immigration teams, RITs, which would work within communities, within councils, within local authorities to help them to identify who is actually living on your patch. What is their immigration status and are they entitled to be in the accommodation they're in? I'm really worried about these houses of multiple occupancies. We've got people going in there. Some of them are boat arrivals. Some of them are waifs and strays. We've got all kinds of people living within our communities. We don't know who they are and we don't know what their status is. So I do think we need to get a grip. And I'm not sure a census, you know, filling out a form by the household.
Funnily enough, a lot of those people might not fill out a form. I was liking it to the fact that when after the EU, everyone who would live to here from the EU and was entitled to stay here after Brexit, and they basically said, you know, can you register and you know, show proof you've lived here for 5 years? And it turns out there was 2 million more people from the EU living here than we knew. I find that extraordinary, given that so much of our, you know, how taxes are, you know, they're taken in and how they are spent by the government in terms of funding for local councils, for areas, whether we know whether we need more houses or rail links or spending on the healthcare in a particular area, is all based on the census. How many people are there, of what age, what are their needs? Well, if that information is skewed so massively, you don't know where millions of people are, whether even if they exist in the country, that makes a nonsense of it, doesn't it?
Yeah, so the EU settlement figure, as you say, originally was predicted to be 2.5 to 3 million. I did a bit of work on that myself, and it turned out to be closer to 7 million.
Oh, it was even, I thought it was around the 5 million mark.
Yeah, it's nearer 7 now.
Who knows?
Because of, I mean, they register through a biometric enrolment system at the Home Office, so they can count the number of applications. But it was closer to 7 million than 3 million in the end. Yeah. And that's just European citizens. So we don't know really how many foreign nationals are staying
and they're
here.
the people who were allowed to be here and came here legally.
And they've been given, most of them have been given settlement status now, so that's fair enough. They're allowed to be here. They've got their settlement. But I don't know how many people coming from other countries have got lawful settlement, are actually living in our communities. How many overstayers?
We should know that. This seems to me to be so basic. And again, I think things I find very frustrating is when you're standing in a queue at passport control, when you come back from a late flight somewhere in Europe, back to your own country with your British passport, that you're having to stand there in queue and maybe, I mean, often ask questions. I always find, where are you from? Where are you coming from? I don't know. I've been on a flight overnight. I've got no idea where I've come from or where I'm going. I don't remember my own name. But you're queuing up and you think, surely they're using this information for something. And you think, well, how is it we don't know who's in the country and what they're doing? And especially as we know, we've got problems with migrant crime. Not you and I have talked a lot about illegal migrant crime, a massive issue. But even with migrants who are here legally, new data showing that migrants are being sanctioned for breaking benefits rules more than 200 times a day. And again, I think it's only recently a lot of people realise how many migrants are not earning and contributing, and whether they're here legally or illegally, are on benefits.
Yeah, so we need a much better integrated system across Whitehall, Julia, on all this. I mean, DWP, HMRC and the Home Office need to talk to each other and share a lot more information about this, because they don't know. I don't think they're very well trained in the DWP local offices on immigration and borders and checking status. And someone comes in and they get a benefit and you think, well, actually, who are you? I mean, and where, are you illegal, or you got overstay, or you got permission? Where's your permission? I'm not sure we're doing those sorts of checks. So we need a much better cross-Whitehall integrated system of identity and entitlement.
Don't Tony Blair's popping up right now on my shoulder going, digital ID cards.
Well, that's part of it, but digital ID cards, extending them to Brits is really just not going to solve the problem, is it? I mean, what we need a proper identity and verification system right across Whitehall, so we know that everybody who's in this country, if they're claiming benefits, they're in it. They've got their immigration status enables them to do that. Overstayers are not entitled to benefits. Yeah,
I would say if you're a migrant to this country, if you run out of money, off you go home. Just want to ask you very finally and briefly, Donald Trump has put in this travel ban for a number of countries, basically basket case countries where they've got a big problem with terrorism and violence, and basically said, no, you can't come to America. You're going to suspend all applications for visas and you're not coming. Tourists, work, students, no. He's now extended that travel ban and restrictions to 20 more countries. Do we need to think about doing this?
Well, the thing about Trump is that he's got such a massive, power base to operate, Julia. We've seen him do things that were unheard of a year ago. Yeah. Like things that they've done on the border, things they're doing on ICE teams in communities, deportations, and now this. Now, we can argue whether that's proportionate or not. Should you write off a complete country because there are, a section of that country are coming and causing harm? I don't know. Maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. I mean, what I'd say about Trump, Julia, is he is delivering the sort of political leadership that is desperately needed to serve the people of America on immigration and borders. They voted him in because he promised to put America first, and blow me down, he has certainly done that. Look at their intake figures on the border. You
don't have to agree with the guy or like the guy a lot of issues. He said he was going to do it. Americans voted for it, and he's done it. Again, I'm pretty sure we could do it if we wanted to. Talk about migration and two very interesting stories in the news today with Danny Shaw, who's a Home Affairs commentator, of course. Good morning to you, Danny.
Hi, Julia.
Hi, thanks so much for joining us. First of all, this is a story, it's interesting about basically the Migration Advisory Committee, watchdog and advisors to the government on the cost of foreign spouses, foreign partners who are brought to this country by people who, are British born here, people who've got right to live here, and they bring their other halves. And I think a lot of people will be really surprised by quite how much that is a cost to the taxpayer. Tell us about it.
Yes, the Migration Advisory Committee, which is a group of experts that advises the government, have done some calculations from 2022-2023. That year, 51,000 people came as partners of people who were legally in the UK. They'd been in a relationship for 2 years or more, so they were allowed to come to Britain. Those are the rules.
Can't just be someone you met on holiday.
No. God, can you imagine?
Oh, I think we're delving into Danny's past there, wonderfully. There's a story there, I can tell.
A long time ago. So over half of them are unemployed. The net fiscal cost was £109,000 compared to...
Per arrival.
Per person, compared to people who are British residents, which is £110,000 contributing.
But that's over a lifetime, isn't it? It's basically. But I'm assuming somebody who arrives in this country from living abroad, they've had to leave their job. They don't have a job when they arrive. Is any evidence, though, that they do get a job when they get here?
No, a lot of them end up not working. I think the employment rate is 65% after a short period of time, but then that goes down as they get older. And obviously, when they're here for some time, they can access the NHS and other benefits. Yeah. And that's why it costs the taxpayer, the government, all of us more money. Yeah. And it's one of the reasons, I think, why the government has tried to tighten the rules around that, particularly with regard to people who are given refugee status.
Yeah, bringing in their partners.
As soon as they were allowed granted refugee status, they were allowed to bring family members in, which seems
and I think a lot of people would see a big difference between someone who is British, born in this country, who then goes and works abroad, lives abroad, meets somebody in another country, falls in love with them, marries them, and then wants to come back and live here. Maybe family's getting older, or they want to have kids here. And they can't. And I've spoken to so many people over the years who say, we just, because of my income, it doesn't hit the salary threshold and it keeps going up and up by, £1,000. Because I'm not a big earner myself, even though I'm a British citizen, I can't bring my wife or my husband in, but someone who is wealthy can. And I think most of us would feel that's not the kind of limitation we want. If it's a genuine relationship and you're British, you should be allowed to bring your partner in. But I think we draw the line for people who have been allowed to come to this country, even if they then get that status, to then be able to bring people in. I think those are very different rights, surely.
I think you're absolutely right. I think someone that's, born in the UK and has lived here, falls in love with someone from abroad, and after 2 years or more long-term relationship, they want to live together, perhaps have a family. That is very different from someone who's recently come to the UK, been allowed to stay and can bring their family in. I think you're absolutely right, and I think the government is trying to make a sharper distinction. Just one thing, what this analysis did by the Migration Advisory Committee, it didn't take account of the children who couples will then have, who may actually contribute to the economy.
But they also are a cost when they're going to state schools.
They may do, but because they're more likely to be younger, they're more likely to be of working age and therefore contributing.
Yeah.
Very complex.
Well, these things are, but these things are complex, aren't they? At the end of the day, British citizens, we cost a lot of money when we're, the early years for, being born and then their education, and then the latter years of the benefits, even if you're, a fully contributing working member of society. And the vast majority, in the country are not net contributors in terms of the actual money they cost. That's why people who are very rich pay more tax and all the other taxes to help pay for everything. But this is about looking at whole life contributions, and as we're seeing again and again, a lot of people who come here legally because they're on low earnings, and once they get the right to stay here, definitely to remain, and this has all been exposed, I think, for a lot of people who wouldn't have known in the last 6 months or so, then they get entitled to benefits. Often then they don't carry on working, or they're still getting extra help, and actually they're not net contributors. Then they retire and they cost frankly a small fortune. And funnily enough, it turns out that mass immigration of people on low incomes and low skilled work isn't the economic boom that we were told it was going to be.
No, but I think what you have to remember is that we had a period of time where governments were encouraging people to come to the UK to fill those jobs, to do those low-paid jobs that British-born workers just didn't want to do. And we had the Boris wave after Brexit of the lax sort of controls around foreign workers, which allowed hundreds of thousands of people to come in, a net migration approaching 1 million, I think. 1 year.
We was talking on the show yesterday about the Policy Exchange think tank saying we need to have an emergency census to actually find out how many of these people, best part of 4 million people. We have no idea who's in this country. We have no idea how many people have arrived, how many people have left. The overstayers on student visas, on work visas, we know is on a grand scale, apart from the illegal arrivals themselves on the boats, on the lorries. We haven't got a clue how many people are in this country. We're told we're around the 70 million mark. I'd be surprised if it's not about 5 million higher than that.
Well, it's 4 years since the last census, wasn't it? And I think there's a very good point to say, because of the inflows, that you need a more up-to-date figure, and that will help plan housing, education and other services as well. That's the whole point of having a census.
Exactly, and a lot of these figures are often wrong anyway, aren't they? Because the chairman of the Migration Advisory Committee, Professor Brian Bell, also pointed out yesterday the overall migration figure would jump in the median term for the current levels of around 204,000 to around 300,000 after 3 years of sharp falls. Basically, it's gone down as a result after the Boris wave when we all found out about it. But net migration, the number of people coming over, the number of people leaving, is set to increase. But by the way, one of the reasons those figures don't look as bad as they have been is because so many Brits are leaving. 250,000 Brits left last year.
Yeah, there's also quite a lot of British people who are returning as well, which is also counted. But no, I mean, net migration is going to go up, it's forecast, to around 300,000, and that's principally because of the surge in asylum seekers and also family visas, which the Migration Advisory Committee says are the two hardest sort of areas to tackle, to bring down. So you can tackle foreign workers coming in, you can put restrictions there, but we have people switching to claim asylum, and we have people coming across illegally through the channel. And as we've seen, as we talked about many times, that is really hard to stop.
Absolutely. Really good to talk to you. Danny Shaw, Home Affairs commentator. Danny Shaw, thank you for joining us. Philip Ingram, I mean, calmiest show we've ever done. We've not ended up talking about migration. The main thing is now we actually are talking about it. We're actually talking about the real numbers. We're actually, we're actually getting people having a chance to actually know what's really going on and how much it's costing us.
Yeah. And when people come in, whether it be a partner of someone who's legitimately in this country or a citizen of this country and all the rest of it, there should be a net contribution score to society. And that should rely on financial, cultural, societal and everything else. Yep. And it should be looked at from a long-term perspective. Yeah. And if someone's coming in to not work, then the whole family has to have a bigger score before they're allowed to stay.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's, again, even though those spouse rules, they were brought in to stop people just bringing in sort of, basically arranged marriages from India and Pakistan.
They're still coming in.
But it also ended up affecting Brits who've been here, who've lived all their lives here, but other than worked abroad, found someone else they fell in love with, and they weren't able to bring them to live with them. It's extraordinary.